On Monday, July 15th, 1991, a great blue heron, off course and out of its element, descended upon the garden at Washington Square Village. An adroit employee picked the dazed bird up and put it inside the railing that rims the fountain pool. There it stood, gathering a crowd of concerned workers and tenants. One of them dashed around the corner and brought some goldfish, thinking the heron might be in the mood for a snack. It wasn't. Another, wishing to comfort the bird, gently stroked it on the back. The heron couldn't relate to that gesture and fluttered into the pool. From there, with an effort, it flew up and over the railing, landing on a grassy spot where it remained, rather disconsolate, for well over an hour. Calls were made to the Bronx Zoo and the Audubon Society. Both places mentioned Miss Vivienne Sokol, a federally licensed wildlife rehabilitator and specialist in migratory birds, as the person who could help. A hotline was established with Miss Sokol, who received a detailed description of the bird's condition and behavior, and gave instructions on how to capture the bird carefully for the purpose of bringing it to her for diagnosis and care. The bird was to be left alone and not crowded. A large carton was to be obtained and lined with newspaper and paper towels. Capturing would entail use of a towel to throw over the bird, at which point the capturer was to grasp the beak and suppress the wings to keep them from being extended. The recipe was followed, but imperfectly. The bird peered backward at its capturer as he approached from the rear, and this proved to be unnerving. The heron hopped away, but a group of well-coordinated academics then formed a circle around the bird, and one of them had the temerity to seize the beak barehanded, weather the momentary raucous shriek, and carefully put the bird in the large carton that had been obtained from a nearby supermarket. The carton just fitted into the back seat of a car, and a drive to Miss Sokol completed the rescue mission. 10 days went by as Miss Sokol cared for the weakened bird, feeding it first through a tube, which provoked the unhappy bird to bray like a donkey and roar like a lion. Then by forced feeding, and then with a diet of small live fish that were much more to the bird's liking, supplemented with vitamins and minerals. Miss Sokol surmised that the young bird, which still had down on its head and shoulders, had dispersed from a heron colony nearby, became emaciated and weak during its search for a new habitat, and then may have lost altitude and struck its head on the walls of glass at Washington Square Village, bringing it to the ground with some temporary damage to the central nervous system. On Thursday, July 25th, 2 of the rescue team from Washington Square Village were told that the heron was healthy and ready to fly. And so early the next day, they drove Miss Sokol and the bird to Pelham Bay for a rendezvous with David Kunstler, who assists in the management of Van Cortlandt and Pelham Bay parks for the City Parks Department. Mr. Kunstler selected a promising spot for release of the heron on the rocky edge of the lagoon, with Co-op City lost in the mists in the far distance, and several egrets spreading their wings on the opposite side of the lagoon. The top of the carton was raised, and while cameras clicked and binoculars were focused, the great blue heron, with a spectacular burst of power, soared into the damp air above the lagoon. After a few minutes of graceful flight, it descended into a watery habitat that seemed to suit it perfectly.